let's get into the meat of this episode with Ibaraki and Rashomon opening up our reviews. Finally, after waiting for this album genuinely almost my entire time of being an active metal fan, we have Matt Heafy's long-spoken of, long-awaited black metal project, and it's probably not at all what you were expecting from that 10 years ago.
No.
Yeah,
I like the cadence of that black metal. I enjoy that. Yeah, it feels like my Chinese democracy. This
really not far off. It's the it's the third Matt Heafy led project in just over 2 years. I will take the opportunity to remind you, he is on a hell of a run right now.
He's a busy boy.
But as you're saying about that time frame, Alec, there will be an entire generation of metal fans who have gotten into Trivium and started listening to us and so on long since this first began to be rumoured and may not have the history. For that history, Matt Heafy from Trivium has been a long avowed black metal fanatic for essentially the entire time that Trivium have been in the spotlight. Like, he's wearing Dark Throne tees in photo shoots going back to the Ascendancy days, and it has influenced his writing for a long time. It became more noticeable than ever, I think, in Trivium around the time of kind of Sin in the Sentence, but the influence that he and the other Trivium guys took from European extreme metal of the 90s in general is, like, next to Metallica, the biggest thing in their whole sound.
Yeah, I think it's always kind of been something that has existed as one of their influences, even if they've never played exclusively black metal. It's been there. So, like, Matt has talked about how much he loves it so many times, and it would always make sense that eventually he would get round to doing a full project of it.
Well, at the start of the 2010s, or even the end of the 2000s, he started saying that he was going to do a black metal side project, called back then, it was Mritu, right? Or Miritu. I remember reading about this in Metal Hammer and getting very, very excited. Trivium were one of my favourite bands. Black metal was like my next favourite thing that I was discovering. For context, in terms of Trivium's timeline, this is when Trivium are like not yet even reaching into the In Waves album and that whole era. Like, it was a while ago. Their amount of albums has doubled since then. Their whole career trajectory has gone up and down and then up again. The whole cultural landscape has shifted quite a bit. Even what we think about black metal has shifted quite a bit in the over 10 years that we've been waiting for this project, right?
Yeah. And Matt's idea of what he wanted a black metal album to be has also shifted quite dramatically. So in a way, I guess I'm kind of glad that it has taken this long, because from the sounds of it, he was just writing like second wave, like Norwegian BM, and that was it. And like, I'm sure that would have been cool, but that is not what we've gotten at all, and it's taken that time to get it here. Yeah,
I mean, at some point, still quite a long time ago, he got Ishan on board, who is one of Matt's like black metal idols with Emperor, but also very pertinently, I think, for where this album ends up going, now a pretty legendary solo artist in his own right, who has been continually, during the years that this album has, come into existence, been continually challenging what components make up what you could loosely call black metal. Many more years passed since then, but the last couple years have given them the time to properly finish it, and we have a record that is, by Matt's own admission, something that spans a decade of his own musical development, even in the track list. Do you think you can feel that kind of massive span of time in the listening to Ibaraki in the way that you could, for example, Chinese Democracy?
I think sort of. Like, I think there are some things where you can hear that are probably a bit more, were written earlier on when it was the kind of more straight, like say, second wave Norwegian black metal kind of stuff. But then you can feel where this album has morphed and grown, and where the boundaries of black metal have been stretched over the couple of years, that Matt has kind of gone, well, I'm going to go along with that. And you can feel where like the whole black gaze thing emerged. Like, you can get bits of that where that's crept in on it. And so it kind of feels like an amalgamation of what has happened within various areas of black metal over the last 10 years, I guess, to my ears.
I think with hindsight, I get that, but I think if you just handed me this and said it was like a new black metal album, or like a new experimental metal album, or whatever you wanted to call it, I don't think I would necessarily get that. I think we get that because we've got the background, we've got the story.
Maybe
and
that's
everything.
it, yeah.
But I do think as well, like, part of it is because, like, Isan has basically been, like, you know, Matt's uncle sat beside him with his turtleneck on, like, gently pushing Matt towards, like, the right bits, because, like, Isan produced it and he co-wrote. Well, he didn't co-write. He basically gave Matt some leftover, like, Emperor/Isan riffs, and Matt was like, "Thanks, mate," for, I think it's track 5 and 6. But yeah, it's been kind of like steered by him.
Yeah, I think the record is certainly not what most of us would have expected. And I think it's a great boon to it that it is so. As you were saying, in the life cycle of this project, Matt has said that he initially started writing something that just sounded like second wave black metal worship, and he showed it to Isan, who just gave him the, yep, that sounds like things I've already done before, which gave Matt this challenge and this desire to actually make something unique, which I think he's quite wonderfully succeeded at. The obvious question that I think is going to get slightly more airtime than it actually deserves in discussion of this album, but let's get out of the way, is this a black metal album?
I mean, I would just call it an extreme metal album because it is all kinds of, like, wild and extreme areas of metal. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a black metal album. I think there is black metal on it, but I don't think you can even really categorize this as any particular kind of thing because it just does a lot.
I mean, it starts like fucking Mr. Bean's Holiday. Like, it's like nuts. I think it's a thing, like, maybe not traditionally, but, you know, we're talking about Psy on that album club.
I mean, for me, would you call Arcturus a black metal band? Because this really reminded me a lot of when we did that.
It's an interesting shout, yeah.
When we did that special,
all the Circus Umpa stuff.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. I was like, he's clearly been listening to a lot of that, and we kind of lumped that in as black metal when we did that album Roulette last year.
Yeah, I think there are, like, some passages that are incredibly blackened. It's probably no surprise that the two songs that spring to mind were the first two singles, which you've highlighted, Alec, as the ones that Isan contributed riffs to. But, you know, I compared Tamashi no Hokai to, like, Shamash and, like, Guerrilla, like, when it came out, and then obviously the one with Nurgle as well. Like, there are extremely undeniable black metal elements at play here. Equally, an awful lot of it, Matt Heafy can't help but having one of the most distinctive writing styles of anyone in modern metal, and an awful lot of it sounds like more fucked up Trivium in a kind of extreme progressive capacity. And I think the real key here is the fact that he said this started off as a kind of straight up second wave project, but his biggest point of inspiration in what it has become is Isan, and not just his old 90s work, but his modern day solo records like After and Eremita. And this is black metal in the way that those are. Like, there is a root of black metal and a component of black metal heavily, but the way that those are seeking to do different things with it and push that into other fresher areas that are not super traditionalist, this is striving for something similar with Matt's own individual musical and cultural influences too, shaping where it goes.
Yeah, I think those like influences from Matt are a huge part of what shape this outside of the metal influences and give this its own identity. But it is, like I said, it's all kind of just like guide that through what is a, I guess, more progressive strand of black metal.
Yeah, and I think what is really important is, like we talked about that first single, the Tamashi no Hoikai. Apologies, everyone. Like that vocal, that sickness take me by the hand, nurture that which I can't understand. Like, that is just a Matt Heafy Trivium vocal over, like, black metal in places, like some of his screaming and things. And, like, that one's a bit more, like, I guess, like we kind of mentioned, like traditional black metal as opposed to some of the other stuff. But just the fact that it is, you can stick it on and you're like, oh yeah, that's a Matt Heafy album. It's an hour long and it's got all his like at parts. It sounds like, yeah, like proggy, like Steven Wilson-y kind of like Opeth sort of stuff, like that Jigoko Deju song. It gets like well proggy before just like going all Dragon Force with the synth for 5 seconds. There's a lot of stuff, but it doesn't feel. I think having that like literally a decade to work on it, it doesn't feel kitchen sink at all.
Yeah, which I didn't know exactly what I wanted from this project until I got it. I was just of course interested in what Matt doing this would sound like. But as soon as we got Tamashii no Hokai, and it was one of the weirdest, most unique black
opening
metal
with a Mario coin sound.
Yeah, like black metal adjacent songs I'd heard in years. It's easy to go with that, but just in general, like you're saying, the combination with the vocals, with that really low end black metal riffing, and all the kind of ideas it has, like I knew I was going to be getting what ultimately is the most interesting outcome, something that is really a bit of an island. And I think this album is so cool. Like, it is so much more rewarding and encouraging to hear someone like Matt Heafy, who is such a lover of this kind of music, but is a writer coming from a very different kind of root place, just go wild and like manhandle it and turn it into what he wants it to be, rather than churn out some, faithful box-ticking recreation. And across an hour, you are hearing Matt Heafy rewire extreme music into his vision of it. And that alone makes it one of the most interesting metal releases of the year, before you get into how actually good the songs are.
I think it kind of comes down to is like him doing everything he would never be able to do with Trivium, essentially. Like taking every little thing he's wanted to do but couldn't do with Trivium because like that band are in a position where like you don't want to fuck around with what they're doing and derail them again. So he's gone, well, I now have this. I can take every idea that I wanted to do that is not going to work in Trivium and just do them here, and they're all going to get in there. You're going to get these kind of like musical theatre storyteller moments where it's all a bit like...
It sounds like Jack Skellington on that,
like
Susanoo no Mikoto one.
Danny Elfman, you've got like Danny Elfman in there. You've got like properly extreme stuff. You've got those really tender, emotional, like semi-acoustic moments. It is so steeped in its like folklore and storytelling, and that like when you dig into lyrics and you go along with these stories, adds so much more and gives it a sense of grandeur. And it must be like so creatively freeing to be able to just kind of get all this out there into this hour-long epic album and actually write great songs doing it.
Yeah, I will say that like I wouldn't necessarily have been able to tell when certain tracks were written in relation to others, but there is a tremendous sense of identity to each song. Like, there's no case of this blurring together and some songs getting lost in the cracks. Like, everything from full-on Fires of Evil in Akumu to extremely like eerie, mournful spaciousness on Komorebi to like samurai warband kicking up a ruckus in Ibaraki Doji. Like the 8 songs that make up the core body of it are all distinctly very, very strong, which makes the act of listening to this front to back very compelling. And from that first single, the thing that I find quite endearing over the whole record is how maximalist it is. Like, the record's mental, and it's quite happy to indulge all of these impulses that it finds exciting. There's so much going on.
Yeah, I mean, I love and respect that there's so much going on, but I would have 100% just taken 10 songs that sound like Ibaraki Doji, like the kind of like Dimmu Borgir, Arcturus, like black metal circus, like Crash Bandicoot running away from a boulder kind of stuff. Like, and it is that riposta by like his screams sound like so like dry in that song as well. Like, it's really rough and like brutal for like, again, someone who you think of as quite controlled, like professional screamer. Like, it sounds really rough there. It's really cool.
Yeah, I will admit I don't entirely understand why it is bookended by these kind of like Danny Elfman-y bar tunes. I don't quite get how they fit into the vibe, because they seem a little more Eastern European to me in origin than Japanese, like everything else. I may be totally wrong there, to which I would hold my hands up, but on the other hand, fuck it. It's how we're going to bookend this bizarre album that's overflowing with ideas anyway.
It's sort of thing where I was a bit like rolling my eyes slightly, because that stuff, like, as much as I love theatre and all that, can grate on me in the context of a metal album.
I like it. I just don't quite get how, like where it's come from. I just want to ask him, like, why is that there? Like, where, like, how does this fit in?
I mean, they're kind of just like, as I say, like shorter opening and closing tracks, so they just didn't bother me too much, because it's kind of like, I almost was like, I'm just going to kind of stick it on there because, again, it's something I want to try my hand at. And get out there. So I think they're fine for what they are, those tracks.
It did for a minute kind of trick me because I was like, is this whole thing just going to be like trolling and it's just going to sound like Corpaclani or something?
Yeah, but the kind of Japanese side of it that really comes out in a lot of the extra instrumentation and stuff like that. Kajitsuchi has a really just grand metal riff that could be in Trivium, but you can like hear the percussive element that is added of like the Japanese stringed instruments just pounding along with that, and there is an incredible amount of instrumental detail like per riff that it's overwhelming at times in the way that in terms of like recording quality and scale of sound and everything, it's totally on par with like massive metal band Trivium, but it's much more to unpack at any kind of moments. And the heavy usage of those kind of sounds and how much they expand the scope of the sound, it did naturally draw me to bands like Psy, and particularly in the kind of symphonic edge, although they are from a different region, Chthonic from Taiwan. And it's really rewarding to hear Matt particularly kind of chase those kind of regional sounds and pack this like big budget black metal album with them in every like nook and cranny.
It does make me go, oh, I wish you'd just kind of give Shogun another go now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that would be so cool with all of this stuff in it.
Well, that's what, we were, the horns and the extra, like, instrumental arrangements and stuff, like, we were talking about in the Court of the Dragon last year, and, like, the small little bits of Isan-provided orchestration that was in it, and we were like, we'd love to see Trivium go all out with that side. We kind of get our wish here, and sometimes it's just fucking crazy. Like that part in Ibaraki Doji, with everything just fully popping off around that riff, is like delirious. It sounds like it's being played by about 40 different musicians.
Yeah, and I think like it helps so much that they have got like this amazing production job on this. Like, this would not work if you gave it the black metal production job and just made it biscuit tin and did just like. And as much as those like I love Prometheus as one of my favorite Emperor records. The Simpsons on that though are like cool, but they are tinny and a bit cheap sounding in a way.
That's the biggest budget sounding Emperor album.
I know it is. I know it absolutely is. But
I don't mind that. I would certainly say Nightside would be. But Matt is drawing from records like The Satanist and stuff like that, which I think some people who maybe listen to this and don't listen to a lot of black metal, they might be like, oh, it doesn't sound like how I imagine 90s black metal to sound. So what makes this a black metal record? But look to something like The Satanist and how fucking huge that was. That
grandeur, that modern strand of like black metal, where again it is big but it is dark and menacing a lot of the time. I mean, like Akuma, obviously, like when you've got Nurgle on a track like that, and like it's like this really monstrous, demonic like vocal that comes in. Just it does add to that feeling of extremity whilst being grand and like imposing.
Yeah, and that song that Nurgle's on, was it Akumu, right? Like that kind of dissonant, just off-sounding guitar at the beginning, that is very like Behemoth sounding, as is the like orchestration. So it kind of makes sense that he is on it, just growling in Polish.
Yeah, and that guest spot from Nurgle is fucking venomous, and
I love that it's all in Polish as well.
Yeah, that's a really cool touch as well, and it certainly adds an extra kind of cadence, kind of feel to his delivery on it is quite particular. Another guest vocal spot on this is going to get the press for how different it is, but Nurgle turning up and doing his like hell priest thing in the way that only he can, and vomiting those words out of his mouth is fucking thunderous. And on like Ibaraki Doji, which we mentioned again, just the full on fucking everything kicking off, the way that the strings then kind of move on to lifting it in like really graceful, beautiful kind of orchestration as the song changes shape into something that is more beautiful and more sorrowful. Like you can really feel Ishan's input there. It's fucking magnificent, and it never sounds the same on any song. You've got the Dragon Force thing you said about the end of Jigoku Dai, which I love, compared to really vast orchestration elsewhere, the Japanese instrumentation, how evil and quintessentially black metal the horns can sometimes sound. You've like stuff like totally accentuating and lifting what are still some kind of like modern metal breakdown parts like you have in Akumu.
Yeah, no, I think in places some of this does sound like they could be Trivium songs in places, like the opening song, the Kajitsuchi. Like when that comes in, that could be a Trivium song. Lots of these fast-paced tempo changes, those cool little ride cymbal riffs. But then you kind of dig deeper and you get that kind of Japanese string instrument gently being plucked, and then you just fucking blast, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is something a little bit different.
They're mangled though, the riffs though, right? Because like they are very, very recognisably Matt Heafy riffs, and like I said, the two most black metal sounding ones are the ones that Ishan wrote. But Matt Heafy's riffs, they are bending themselves into more violent shapes of that kind of riff than you normally get from him. And this is totally the most kind of prog leaning thing that he's done, right? Which, it makes sense, outside of big radio friendly metal band Trivium. But you mentioned the kind of the some of the opethy kind of blissful notes that it hits. And don't forget as well, you are hearing the likes of Alex Bent and Paolo as session musicians essentially on this, going down those kind of avenues with him. And hearing Paolo's bass on like Kajitsuki, like as the kind of melodic counterpart to the guitar line, it's just very, very pretty.
Oh no, I think it absolutely is like Jigoku Deu, like where that goes into like the prettier kind of terrain again, where like, and that allows the dynamics of the record to really stretch, and that's where like the proggy side comes in, where it doesn't, where like Trivium a lot of the time is always kind of like mighty heavy metal like power, and while they have their softer moments, it never feels quite as like specifically tying into a certain mood of like again Jigoku Deu, like it was like it is quite tender and emotional, and the lyrical content suits that approach where it gets more twisted as it goes. Where it starts off nice, and then as the sort of the storyline gets darker, Matt's vocals get heavier, and they the prog thing will like allowing these stories to develop across the song and musically match up with that is like something that you don't necessarily get as much with Trivium.
Yeah, I mean that song is where you get that kind of really cool storytelling quality, which is apt given the focus on ancient Japanese mythology and such, which I'm excited to dig into it and learn more about these kind of stories. But it's got kind of folk songish element that it starts off with, and then it builds over the course of it into that it kills me to see what she has become thing. Matt is a really good focal point on this in terms of like bringing you throughout all these worlds. I think the scream, you mentioned Alec, how like he is trying something a little more strained and extremed here. Like he sounds like Matt Heafy from Trivium. Like he can't really get away from having a very particular screaming sound, but it does sound like he's doing something that's a little bit kind of a harsher, more uncomfortable end of that sort of limited thing that he does. But there is an awful lot of clean singing on it as well, which his like powerful and accomplished heavy metal singing is such a boon to it. But you're right in that there are parts where he pushes it into emotional ranges that Trivium hasn't had as much room for, where Komorebi is the one that I was really drawn to for that, because he sounds like intensely desperate and sorrowful on it, that it like genuinely takes you aback. I mean, it also made me want a Trivium Chemist tour even more, because I made that connection in my head. But he sounds like fucking just wretched and despondent on that track.
Yeah, they're proper like naked sounding vocals, which again, like immediately coming after it, you've got the most kind of like typical black metal bit, which funnily enough comes from the singer of My Chemical Romance. But the fact that you have that vocal from Matt there, and then immediately after you got just the fucking blasting song.
I love the contrast of Matt's vocals on Ronin as well, where he's doing again the really melodic stuff like on that song.
Yeah, I think it really worked. I'm really glad that this doesn't just sound like, I don't know, Pro Fanatica or something. And it's like people, I've seen that kind of people talking about this album going, oh, it's not proper black metal. I don't know what you were expecting, because if it just sounded like your Commodore Garden, like bargain bin black metal band, you'd say, oh, well, he's not very good at that, is he? Like,
they'd complain it's derivative and not doing anything new.
Yeah, no, I was taken aback by how kind of where it goes and like how much I enjoyed it while still being rooted in that like black metal, because I hate the whole kind of like, you sound so wanky when you're like, black metal, it's a vibe, it's a lifestyle, man. But it's like it like runs through this album without being necessarily like confined to specific genre tropes,
which really does remind me of an album like Eremita by Isan.
Yeah,
which is what, like, again, the fucking, in terms of spirit, that's the exact pocket that he's drawing from. Like I still have no fucking clue what the Mario coin noises are doing there in Tamashii no Hokai. But that is an incredible metal song with so many ideas, and it is so bowel-wrenchingly heavy and incredibly evil sounding. Like, thank you, Isan, for digging up that riff in particular. But like, that is that's black metal, and that in Akumu in the middle are like the peak evil double. But then, there's Ronin, which is a fantastic song in its own right. Like, the ethereal, progressive instinct of it, and how imperious Matt sounds when he lifts in the chorus. But then, blood is fucking spat.
That guest spot just makes me happy. Just Gerard Way coming in and just sounding like a feral, untamed, like wild beast.
Yeah, Danger Days next week. Everybody.
Yeah, like. Just think like the last, like when you look at like, the solo records Gerard Way put out, and like the sort of the dance pop sort of stuff he was doing, and then he's coming in and doing this, and he just sounds like a demon just unleashed. I was just like, yeah, go on, Gerard, you do it. And it's a great contrast. Like, that song is 9 minutes. It goes to so many places. It is super melodic. Matt's clean vocals and the whole like standing on the planes bit, like is so epic and so grand, and it just provides this perfect gateway for then Gerard to come in on this chorus and just go mental.
Let's get Gerard on the next Devil Master album. No,
I love that Isan has produced a record that has Gerard Way on it.
It's mental, isn't it? I also love that Gerard basically he got in touch with Matt to ask how to do black metal tremolo.
Yeah. Matt was like, "While you're here, do you want to do this?" So yeah, it's cool because it's two guys from outside of black metal, but who have a real, passion for it, getting to flex their muscles from it. I will say that that's possibly the only song that I would say repeats itself like maybe one time too many, but that's the most criticism I have on this record. And like, I did not realize this record was over an hour the first time I heard it. It's enthralling start to finish.
It's really transportative, and like the moments where you say you feel like you're in these like Japanese the reeds in the fields, like the wind blowing. Like,
I am going to play a lot of Shogun Total War. Well,
it is this at times. Like, you can be like, you could soundtrack a Kurosawa movie with some of the parts of this. Like,
gonna be building your Gundam to
mate, I could do it. I could,
Yeah, it's a massive like epic metal project, and the more of them we got, the fucking better. And it is super grim and gnarly at times. Like, it really, really fucking is. I won't have that this isn't black metal in any kind of capacity, but it is.
I mean, he sings "skeletons in bags of flesh is all we are." Like, that is a gnarly black metal lyric if there ever was one.
It's capable of, incredible moments of clarity and huge grandeur as well. Susanoo no Mikoto at the end is so euphoric. It's crazy until Isan actually turns up vocally and sounds like the monster under your bed for that little part. But like, yeah, I think this record was wicked.
Yeah, I think it's great. Like, it is so just cool, and it's a, like I said, it's an island by itself, this record. There's nothing else like it at the moment.
Yeah, and again, not really had it that long, so I can't wait to just listen to it more. Like, I've only been listening to it for a couple of weeks. I think there's going to be a lot more I'm going to kind of dig out of this on repeat listens, because I think on my first listen I wasn't like disappointed, but I think it took me a while to kind of dig into everything, just because there is quite a lot to digest, but it's so fucking rewarding. And again, just the actual payoff of it being 10 years and you get so much stuff and pretty much all of it works, and it stays true to that idea of Matt Heafy doing a black metal album, but it sounds nothing like you would expect it to.
It doesn't care about fitting into a specific thing. Like, either, caring about being super accepted as like, oh no, this is a black metal project, really, like, look, cool underground people, I'm one of you, which, Matt knows that he isn't going to appeal and win over every fucking, Cavoltist out there who have already made up their mind about him like 15 years ago. He's just writing this kind of music that he wants to make in his way and take ownership of, his idea of what an exciting new black metal project could be like. I think it's probably in that sense it's more likely to appeal to the Trivium fan who already likes him and his writing style, but if they are going to get something that challenges them and confronts them with, sounds and much more dense pieces of music than they may have faced before.
Yeah, I mean, like, I kind of like almost sit in the middle of that category where I am more of a Trivium fan, so getting that, but with these more progressive, more extreme elements that, like, in another context, I might not be as into, but when you get that Matt Heafy Trivium kind of core at it, it does make it that much more palatable to me.
Now feeling a bit more optimistic about Sam's thoughts on Psy next week.
More on that when we get to it next week, I guess.
And there is a lot about this that could have been a mess, from like, you know, the fractured, prolonged way that it was written to the sheer amount of weird things that are piled into its runtime. But the care of, you know, musicians like these working together, it's very admirable just how coherent it's turned out to be.
I mean, Matt's a professional, isn't he? He's gonna pour the care into his craft and not put out a subpar kind of thing. Like, well, like even the Trivium albums I don't like. They are carefully constructed records, like, and that's got as much of it going on here.
It gives me that same feeling as Shogun in that, obviously, because it is kind of digging into some of the like similar topics and stuff. But it just makes you feel like you are in that world for like an hour, and it's such a fascinating, fun, curious, like foreign place to be. Compared to, again, like Shogun, and then immediately after you have In Waves, which is a cool album, but it's not like an immersive album. It's like loads of like short songs, headbang, whereas Shogun is this deep, rich, immersive journey. And I think this is the closest thing he's come to, like, since doing that, basically.
Well, I mean, it's going further in that, more than, because it's not relying on, you know, writing big festival songs or anything like that. It's awesome.